our project brief template here, which hopefully folks have been using this to put together your drafts. If not, we have this, and we have this link. And let me also make sure I have the chat here. And I'm just going to walk through some of these sections. So I think in the last like Q&A we had, it was more of a general, the application process. And this is like, the project brief is a very particular part of the process that might be different for other programs or other applications. It's different from like a pitch deck. So even if you've made like a pitch deck before, where we're kind of asking for something that's an earlier stage of that. So you don't have to put together like a formal pitch deck. May is asking, I hope I'm saying that right, May, can we include images? Yes, I would absolutely recommend including images, because images can be a lot less ambiguous than text. I would recommend using like royalty-free images, or even, let's see, these aren't external facing. I think it's fine to use like screenshots from similar games, if that helps convey your point. Just with the the understanding that you can't then use them in the actual game or something like that. Let's see. Pravia is asking, and Pravia, let me know if I say that right. Is the Q&A sessions recording available? So Lauren, where would that be if folks wanted to reach that? Was it recorded? It's not?
It is recorded. I have not had the chance to take out the little snippets that we need to take out before we can upload it publicly.
Okay. So we have that recording, and we'll try to get that up, hopefully. But yes, just message us about it, because we have a lot of recording things that we're uploading this week. So we just want to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. But okay, so let's talk about this project brief. So the idea of this is, we are trying to get as much understanding of the project you want to make in the course over the 12 weeks, without you having to make a bunch of stuff to show us that. So without you having to actually do code and get art assets and put it together. It's essentially like a pitch document, but we're going to be going through building skills of how to pitch and put together pitch documents in the class. So this is like before that, right? So we want to make it as straightforward and easy for folks to apply as possible. But this also means there isn't really a lot of applications that have something similar to this. So we have right here at the top, like the stuff that we're excited about, and in general with our cohorts. So these are always great things to convey just in the like actual copy of your brief. So especially for this program, we are looking for like projects with a focus and interest in social impact, and the development of your chosen project with a serious interest in moving forward with your project beyond the program. So what this means is that we're looking for this to be like an actual prototype. Essentially, you are going to make a prototype and try and do something with it beyond the course, whether that is sending it to people to get it funded, whether that's submitting it to festivals, whether that's trying to get it placed in installation spaces or things like that. And it's totally doable for you to decide over the course of the program that maybe there is a concern you have with your project and you want to move on to a different project, or you want to tweak the project. But at least at this point, you are thinking about a project that you are trying to move forward with. And then we'll undergo the prototyping process together. So it's also good to think about the importance of community and teamwork. We're very collaborative here at Code Coven. We care about that a lot. And also Code Coven's missions and values. So if you're in the, let me see this question. So when applying, if not using a pitch deck, return in a copy of the project brief. Is the brief preferred over a pitch deck? So I think in the application, it was originally described as a pitch deck, as in like, this is your starting point for your pitch deck, and over the course, we will be putting together a pitch deck. But we decided to make it broader to just give folks more options. So it can be formatted like a pitch deck if that is something you're more comfortable with, Iman. Since it's like slide based, that's perfectly fine. If it's more of a document, that's also perfectly fine. and this is where we're doing this course for the first time. So we're gonna be like tweaking things as we understand what makes sense for folks. Okay, but yeah, the thought process there is that we don't want folks who are unfamiliar with pitch decks to be intimidated, essentially, from making something in terms of the structure. We want to make it as accessible as possible. Okay, so those are, yeah, kind of just general things to keep in mind with applications for our programs in general. And here is some examples of social impact themes. It's important to note these are not all inclusive. So if folks have other examples they want to use for your specific project, I think it's much more like doable to figure out what the project you want to make is, and then figure out how it's going to relate to social impact in a way that lets you make the project you want, as opposed to like having to reverse engineer a project that fits one of these definitions. We also have this FAQ for folks to look through, so please look through that if you have more follow-up questions. But let's get to the brief in general. So the brief itself, or if you're setting up as a pitch deck, it will be exactly the same except for structure. But there's three things that we're looking for: is kind of like a brief description of what the game or tech experience. So the reason we're saying tech experience is we don't want to just limit this to games. If folks have ideas for things like installations or interactive content that maybe isn't exactly a game, you're also welcome to pitch that or submit that to the course. So the three sections are kind of a brief description of your experience, and then a overview of your team. So this can be just information, names, pronouns, emails, location, discipline, portfolios. Any information here is very helpful, and we'll get into that in a bit more detail. And then also plans for the stipend. So how is the stipend going to help you? And let's scroll back up and let's just go through these in order. So the brief description here, this is a very, like, probably the first section to really kind of think about from a creative standpoint, right? So there's a few different ways you can approach this, but essentially, I want to know what is compelling to you about your project. Why do you want to work on it for this program? And like, what is the kind of important details about it, right? So you can write about what is the kind of core gameplay experience or the loop. What is the player doing most of the time? And what is the experience for them? How do they kind of progress through the experience? And this bullet point we said is like, your time and resources are valuable. Why is now the right time for your project? So it's essentially, I really want to know why this project. Why is this the project that you're submitting to this program out of 100 possible projects you could have concepted and pitched, and really like getting a clear sense of this is the project you want to be working on. Is the project you want to take forward, and why that matters to you. I think it's much more important that I feel like I get a clear sense of like, this is why it matters to you, than for me to necessarily even like agree with like why it matters to you. Like, that's not what we're doing with the application. We're not really making a comment on the idea or the concept itself. It's really just like trying to find teams that really have a clear vision of what they want to do, and we have a sense of, okay, we think this course will help, and we think that we can provide support for those goals. And then this other bullet point we had here was like, if this project is successful beyond your wildest dreams, what positive impact would it have on society? So the reason we phrase this way is that I think a lot of the time, especially folks from marginalized backgrounds, I think when they tend to pitch projects, they tend to be very pragmatic about it and be like, oh, we're going to do, this small thing, and it's going to have this kind of audience, and we're gonna put it in like this number of festivals. And I think at this point in the project, in the application process, I think I just really want to hear what is like the things that like, it's like, oh, you don't really tell people this because you'll sound silly, but I want to know what excites you and what you think is like the potential of what you want to work on. Because the prototyping process is where we bring like, pragmatism and reality and budgets and timelines into play and say like, okay, what is a version of this project that is actually feasible and that we can make? So I think it's really good to, when you're pitching this, be like, yeah, like this is absolutely going to change the world, because like, why wouldn't it? And it's totally okay to, like, no one has to worry about saying something that's like going to be like embarrassing or anything like that. We're happy to like read what is exciting about your projects. And so I will go through like an example a little later on of like me writing it about one of my projects, and how this is how I kind of write when I do applications for things. And I really try and just be very sincere about how I feel about my project. So that is the project brief. We also have this overview of your team. So we have an optional application for team members to submit their own kind of info, their own portfolios, and also like what they care about with this project. But it can also be done here in the project brief. And essentially, oh, I see. I remember there was a question about there being a section here for it says why this project in this section versus if you fill it out individually. And the distinction is there is no distinction. So if you fill out the team application in a way where every individual team member fills out an application, then this section is just going to be like repeating that information or something like that, or a chance for you to add extra context or things like that. But essentially, we want to know, okay, here is the idea after the brief description. We have a sense of what is the idea, what are the important aspects of it. Is it a concept that requires a lot of art or a lot of engineering or a lot of design? So depending on that, we want to make sure that the team one has the kind of skill distribution that's necessary for what we feel like the needs of that project is. And also that we feel like the team is capable of making a version of a prototype of this project. So that's the main thing that we want folks to like look at proving. So if you've worked on things like game jams, that is like plenty of, I think, experience, especially if you have any game jam projects that are similar to the project you're pitching. Those are great things to mention in this kind of like portfolio section of any team members. So I think, yeah, that idea of like in the class, like unlike other courses we've done at Code Coven, where we either do a lot of small projects or we do one longer project, but it's meant to be more of like a finished project. We are doing a deep dive in this on kind of that early phase of development with prototypes. So essentially the skill set of I can make a proof of concept quickly or effectively. So if you've done a game jam, like a week-long game jam, I think, and you're able to put something together, I think that's very good skill set for this. And I think that will basically be like the first or second week of the class, is something similar to a game jam. And then from that point on, we'll kind of be like taking that and adding to it and polishing and iterating on that concept to make a more and more effective prototype. So yeah, so the things to focus on here are like, is your project really design heavy? Let's make sure that we are communicating that we have like designers on your team, or there's a lot of art, there's enough artists on your team, or like the single artist on your team has a clear like way of showing like, oh, this is someone who can meet the art requirements of this project. So those are the things that will make this section very helpful to us. And it's also just a way to give us some logistical information, like things we can follow up on in the interview stage, if we're able to move folks to the interview stage. Like, for example, if everyone is in a different country or different time zone, that's a thing we'll want to like double check and see, like, is that a thing that you're feeling concerned about? Is that a thing that you have experience managing in prior to this course? And is there like additional support you'll need essentially? Okay, any questions with this brief overview of teams section here? Let's see, I'm not seeing any questions, but if there are, I will come back, I'll circle back to it. So we'll move on to, okay, cool, very clear. But yeah, if folks have questions, let me know. And then the third section here is how you plan to distribute the stipend over the program's 12-week period. So if team salaries are not budgeted to all be equal, please provide a further explanation. The reason for this is just that I think from what I can picture with folks in this class, oh, this is actually, this will link back to something with this team section actually. Part of the reason why we have the ability for folks to put in individual applications is that I'd really like to avoid the scenario, ideally, where teams are applying and it's like one like core member of the team that is interested in the program and like is interested in the kind of prototyping aspects and the business development aspects and the kind of curriculum in that program, and the rest of the members of the team are kind of there to like make the game, and this is a means to end for them. Essentially, I would love for teams where every member of the team is able to be a student in the course and like learn and get something out of it. So we're absolutely looking for teams where like everyone on the team has an interest in prototyping and in biz dev from their particular discipline. And so that's a thing that's really great to be able to convey in this section. Especially with this like why this project section, whether that's done individually or it's done in the project brief itself. It's really like I want to make sure that no one is like, you know, having to go to the class. Essentially, I want to make sure everyone on the team wants to be in the class, just for your sakes. I don't want to have like folks be like in a class where the material is just not really relevant to them. You know, so that's an aspect to consider, and that's also why going back to this budget stipend, I'm expecting a lot of teams to be very kind of horizontal and have like kind of equal distribution around the teams, as opposed to like a very clear like this is the like head of the team and everyone else works for the head of the team. I think that's less likely. But if that is the case with your team and that's how it's set up, please just let us know and like clarify that for us. I think that's very helpful. So the bullet points we have here is that with the understanding that $5,000 cannot fund a whole game, which is not necessarily true, right? Like if you were making a game, you wanted to spend $5,000 on it, you could. But for the context of this course, because it's a prototyping course, I think the conceit is that $5,000 is here for you to allocate during the prototyping phase, and the scope of the game will likely be larger than that. So with that understanding that you're going to need additional resources, what do you think is the best way to use this amount to help you with the course? Is that going to be allocated primarily to the people on the team in terms of giving them like financial resources? Is it going to go towards things like software licenses? Is it going to go towards things like free assets, like sound effects, art, like add-ons for whatever engine you're using? That kind of information is very, very helpful. And just like seeing where folks are thinking of focusing and what is going to be helpful to you, so we can understand if that aligns with this project brief. So just making sure that everything feels like it's driven by like the game that you're making is very, very helpful to see. So like if you have a game that has, you know, a very strong AI component, and maybe you don't have that many programmers to like make sure your AI is good, this is a chance for you to say, okay, part of what we're going to do with this stipend is maybe we're going to get this asset kit that has a lot of AI functionalities and scripts and things like that. And we're going to use that to get the features that we need and we want to work on without having to have a very like dedicated programming skill set. So these are ways for you to like provide information to fill in gaps of like, how are we actually going to make the game? This is also a great time to say, what problems do you foresee based on this decision? What solutions can you think of? So this is like thinking of like, okay, well, we don't have enough money to get like this many art assets. So we are going to have to use free assets where we can in order to kind of supplement that. And maybe some problems on that will be, okay, we're limited in our art style to some extent based on the amount of assets we can find and what matches that art style. And a solution to that could be, okay, maybe we're devoting some time to take all those art assets and modify them slightly just so they match a little bit better, which means we can use a couple extra asset packs that otherwise wouldn't fit. So that's like a very specific example of like, here's a problem based on we don't have infinite funds, and we're being intentional about what we can do with our skill levels, with our skill sets to address that in advance. So just seeing that you're thinking about things like that's really helpful, especially if like you've like tried it out and you're like, okay, we think this will save us some time. Those are all really helpful things to be able to convey. And then I think this is like the most kind of important aspect of this. This third bullet point is, what will $5,000 or however much you're requesting, right? What will that empower you to do that you couldn't do otherwise? So this is very much like when you apply to most programs, you can say like, oh, this is what I think I'm going to get out of the course. And this is an additional aspect to that is with this course, because of the fact that there is a $5,000 stipend, we're going to be able to do this, and we wouldn't be able to do that otherwise. We would have to try something else, you know. So like a good example of this is maybe you are planning to work on this prototype regardless, but with this $5,000 stipend, you get an extra time to experiment with your art style or with a particular feature that you really want to test out and see if it's actually compelling before kind of devoting a significant amount of your time towards a project. And it will give you the chance to test that, iterate on it, make it a much more compelling aspect of your game before you decide to move forward. So those are the three sections. Any questions there with the three sections there? And remember, this can be formatted how you want. So it can be formatted kind of similar to this this document, but also you can totally do it with slides and images. Okay, so we have, May says, I'm unsure how much we will need for assets, but we all do need a salary to take less time at work. Is a very rough estimate okay, or should I have a more specific plan? I think a rough estimate is okay. I would just make sure that you're not underestimating, right? Because the last thing we want is for you to feel like this is enough this allows you to take off enough time at work and things like that, and then realize, oh, okay, we've asked for too little money, right? Or something like that. That's very, that's not a scenario I want anyone in the class to be in, where you're feeling like you have too much on your plate. But I think in terms of estimates, like, yeah, it doesn't have to be down to like the dollar. It can absolutely be like a ballpark figure, if that's helpful. It says, I read somewhere in this document, I think software licenses will not be provided by the accelerator. You said that we could include those in the budget. So that means we just have to make sure to include those in the budget? Yes. So essentially, things like software licenses can go in the budget. They will like have to come out of the stipend. And what I will say is that I think we also have a note specifically about hardware, where we're like, I don't think that typically the budgets should include things like hardware if you don't already own it, is what I will say. So if you have the hardware and you can use this to recoup some costs on like hardware purchases, I think that is okay. And same with software licenses. Essentially, the rule of thumb, I will say, is that for these projects, I would like to make sure as much as possible that everything that everyone needs to work on the project, they have access to from day one of the course. So if you need to buy software licenses, make sure that's something you can buy like day one of the course. If you have hardware, make sure that's something that you like have before the course. And that's why I would say like it's we don't recommend doing hardware purchases, because then it's like someone will have to essentially buy it in advance, and the teams that are able to do that will be teams that have savings to do something like that. And essentially the concern there is that you'll order some kind of hardware that will come in the mail, and there'll be some kind of delay. And even if it's a week off, that's a significant chunk of time in a 12-week course. And we don't want anyone to have to deal with that. So I would just say address those things in scope, right? So if it's like, okay, here's an idea for a project we have, and it's going to use like the leap motion or the HTC Vive, maybe we make a version of this that doesn't use that, so that we can avoid having to get that hardware. So Eloise says, is it okay to include in the budget the purchase of a toolkit that may or may not be used in the final version of the game, like something just needed for experimentation purposes? Absolutely. I think it's totally okay to include things that you're not 100% sure you will need. And I would just contextualize that. Be like, this is something that we are planning to verify during the course, and see whether it's actually a viable thing to use for our project. And that's exactly the kind of thing that you would be able to do with this stipend in this course that you wouldn't do otherwise. So I think that's perfectly within scope. Javier says, could you give another example of what will the budget empower you to do? Yeah, let me give you like another example. So I think some obvious examples would be like being able to take off time from work or contracts in order to really focus on this project. Even if that's not like, you know, taking off time completely. If you're able to take off some time, that's still super, I think, helpful for a lot of folks. I think it could be like, it could be something like, oh, it'll make sure that we can have like, you know, all the artists on our team can have Maya or something like that, which is something that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And that allows you to pitch a project that's much more 3D driven than you would otherwise be able to do. We can also talk about, let's say, being able to, as Eloise said, like being able to purchase things that you think will be like very helpful, but you're not 100% sure. So you can properly experiment with that. And outside of the course, you know, it's if that's something that's like, you know, a few $100s, it might not really make sense to justify that purchase if it's not within the scope of this course and you're getting a stipend to do that. I think those are all good examples. I think, what else? What's like a fourth one? Maybe like being able to just have a much higher like visual target for this game by using like asset packs and things like that. So you can focus on, here are your kind of like hero assets, the things that you're going to spend a lot of time on, and you're going to do those and you produce that with your team. And then you're going to be able to take, you know, a bunch of assets from asset packs and have a much larger variety of art if that's very important to your game. Or for example, you buy a bunch of asset packs, and then because you have a starting point, okay, you have a bunch of these like humanoid characters or something, you can then modify those instead of starting from scratch, and it's going to save you a lot of time and allow you to say be able to implement a game that has a lot of characters, and you wouldn't be able to do that otherwise. And I think those are kind of aspects of especially if it's very important and crucial to the concept of the prototype. I think those are some examples. And yeah, just let me know if that answered your question. Cool. Okay, excellent. So at the end here, the other thing I have is just a version of like the project description section that I just wrote about my project mid-autumn. And you'll see that I did this in 2 ways. I did this in like bullet points to show that like I don't really care about like, you know, using flowery language or anything like that, or like it's really just like, what is the information, what is the important points to cover, and what do we care about. And then here's a version of like, I wrote it out more, and it's like 300 words, and like gives you like a lot more detail. So for example, if we go back to the top here, the three things. What will the core loop of your project be? What is the user or player experience? Why is now the right time for your project? If this project is successful beyond your wildest dreams, what positive impact would it have on society? Okay, so the first thing is kind of the concept of the project. So I'm talking about genre, I'm talking about roguelites, how we kind of want to do like a narrative-driven roguelite. And we're going to take the kind of structure of roguelites and tell the story of an Asian American community grappling with gentrification, which is what Mid-Autumn, the game, is about. So this is kind of like just high level what we're doing with the project. Here is the kind of description of the core loop. The player is going to move from room to room, dispatching enemies in the spirit world, and then there will be a town where they can speak to locals and progress the narrative. And then I'm going to start talking about like, okay, why make this game now? So it's like, okay, we're going to use the more fantastical elements to speak to economic justice. And here, economic justice is not a term I actually use very often to describe Mid-Autumn, but I'm using it specifically just because it's mentioned here. And I was like, okay, we're making a game that's about gentrification. I feel like that's economic justice, so I put that down. And you, like I mentioned, you don't have to use the terms that are here explicitly. You can absolutely use different terms. And like, I would just be very explicit if you're using a different term and say something like speak to the social impact theme of diversity or something like that. Because for some reason, diversity is not mentioned like very explicitly in the Unity Charitable Fund copy that we're using as a starting point for this. So I would just specifically call out, this is so that the reviewers, the app reviewers, just know, oh, okay, this is the social impact part. And it's just very like explicit. Lauren says, you can look here for more theme inspiration. Yeah, that is a link to the Games for Change like Steam sale page. It's a really great example of like all the different types of things that Games for Change has like said, oh, these are social impact games. These are games that got into the festival essentially. So there's a lot of different things, both more commercial and less commercial titles. So this bullet point is like, yeah, so we're going to speak to that theme, the theme of economic justice, and then I'm just being a bit specific about it. And an Asian American community undergoing gentrification. And here is like, this is why we're making it now, because with the pandemic, with a lot of like anti-Asian xenophobia, why does this say anti-Asian xenophobia Asian? There we go. Anti-Asian xenophobia on the rise. It's vital for us to be making a game that is about these topics. And then this is like a much vaguer thing that I might say, I think down here. But just in the interest of making the bullet points, this is like, if the game is successful beyond my wildest dreams, what is the thing I care about, right? So for me, it's about inspiring folks, it's about community, it's about having something that down the road people look back to and it inspires them to make positive change. So that's this all in bullet points. And you can imagine like this could be set up with slides, with images to help convey this information more effectively, or even like, yeah, in like this document form with like images if you want to help kind of set the tone and set the illustrate the ideas you're talking about. And then down here, if folks want to check this out, I have a more like kind of written out version of this. And it's basically the same information. It really is just written out in sentences and trying to like find like effective phrasing for things that like, making sure I'm talking about like things like community, things that I care about, things like Asian diaspora. I mentioned Asian diaspora communities a bunch of times here as I'm like Asian American community, Asian diaspora community. But essentially, as you're describing this, it's really like, what do you care about? Make sure that's front and center. Make sure there's like a clear, as clear of a picture as you can get of what the game experience is. So this is, I would definitely, if it was me, put an image here where it's like, okay, you play as this character, you're going through roguelike gameplay, going through rooms, and then you're in town speaking to locals. So I would probably have a picture here of If I didn't have any screenshots from my game, like you might not, I would find like screenshots from like roguelites, and be like, here's a picture of someone going from room to room. Here's a picture of someone in town talking to people that feels representative.